This commemorative cross, which in the regiment here we call our Vimy cross, commemorates the members of the 21st Battalion who we lost on the taking of Vimy Ridge. Taking of Vimy Ridge was important not only to the Allied cause, but it was very important to Canada. After Vimy Ridge and the other countries had failed to take it, the other Allied countries, Canada was never again looked at as a colonial country. This is the colors of the 21st Battalion. That was the unit that was sent overseas out of this armories. We were called out as the 21st. This is an expeditionary force, which means they're only in for the service during the war. Once the war is over and they brought them back, they are discharged to either go back to the regiment or go back to civvy life, whichever they wish. It just has a few of the battle honors on these. They're just sewn on because these are temporary colors. Okay, now I'm just going to go down another drawer and show you what happened after the war. We had the colors redone again. This time they're done as permanent colors. They're all embroidered on. The battle honors are embroidered on. The King's Crown on the top. The name, instead of the Expeditionary Force, it has the Princess of Wales' own regiment. I got to meet a lot of the men of the 21st Battalion. And it used to be a real joy because on Friday night we'd come down to the sergeant's mess and we'd come in the mess and there'd be anywhere from a dozen to 20 members of the 21st all sitting in there. We had a big round table there and it was nicknamed the bullshit table. These fellows would go in and talk to each other about the First World War, because what they'd went through, they couldn't talk to anybody else about it. They'd talk about it amongst themselves. We have as much as possible in this museum, which is hands-on. The idea is that people can come in and get to handle the equipment, get an idea of the weight, what it looks like, and not be behind glass all the time. Many of the people who come into the museum are very impressed with the fact that they can actually touch it, pick it up, and everything. And it is much nicer. Like, people have no idea the weight of a 36 grenade until you pick one up in your hand and you get an idea just how much this thing weighs. The thing is, this place didn't become a country till 1867. This regiment's older in the country. And the history of the militia is the history of the country. The country is all wrapped around the militia, okay? Because everything that's ever happened, you know, has to do with the militia, going right back to the very beginning. And if you don't know your past and the mistakes were made, you're bound to make them again. I grew up here pretty well. When you consider that service time, I had 43 years service time, and plus all the time since then, being with the Regimental Association for probably 10 years with them, and then come down, take the museum over and work here. You know, I find this place to me is therapy. Like, I come down to the museum here, and if you can have a bad day or something like that, or you don't feel good, come down here and you work on the museum and everything, and when you go home at night, you feel better. You just good therapy. Herbert, yes. Yep.
Tell me the story.
Well, that was one year. I don't know who. I can't remember. It started when I was not here, when I was working at headquarters, and they had this big granite rock, and they decided that a recruit course each summer, they'd each take a turn, each one of the privates take a turn carrying him on parade. And they painted all him up, and he put stripes on his arms and everything. And he was sort of a fun sort of idea that they started at one course, and it's like tradition. All tradition is something you did this year that you enjoyed so much, you do it again next year. So that's how tradition starts. And this rock was started by a recruit course. I can't remember which one. And it's still here, and they still have them. One day when I was the RSM, I was sitting in my office working away, and I heard this crash and a whole bunch of cheering go on. I went, what the heck is going on? So I go out there, and there's some soldiers up on the balcony. The rest are on the parade square, and they're picking Herbert up. I said, what in hell are you doing? Well, we got to throw him off 3 times so he can get his jump wings. So they threw him up the balcony 3 times and gave him his parachute wings. So he now has parachute wings on. So this is what they do now. They throw him off of the balcony to keep his wings. But it's just the way tradition is started. Just something as simple as that. There's been all kinds of stories about ghosts in the building. People have seen them, and they're convinced he's an officer because when he comes to the sergeant's mess, he don't come in the door. He stops at the doorway, which is tradition that an officer is not entitled to come into the sergeant's mess unless he's invited. So we're convinced he's an officer. Between Christmas and New Year's, a couple years ago, I decided I would come down here. I thought it'd be a good time to get some of my paperwork done. So I don't like to sit in the office because offices don't have a nice atmosphere. So I went into the museum, set up a table on the far side of one of the big showcases, and was doing my paperwork. This being a 100-plus-year-old building, when the heat's on during the winter time, by Christmas time, the floors have a tendency to creak as they shrink from the heat. I was sitting there doing my paperwork, and everything was going along fine. And I had the doors locked, which meant nobody else could get in the building. So all of a sudden, I hear somebody walking into the QM stores, which is where the museum is now, and walk around the showcase and walking towards me. And I wondered, who the heck got in? So I get up and I walked around. There wasn't a soul in here but me. And I walked around the museum, around the showcases, and I distinctly heard the person walk into the museum and walk around the left side of the showcase. So whether I like to believe in ghosts or not, I'm stuck. I got to believe in him now because he paid me a visit. Another funny one I had, I was working, speaking of Dick Whale earlier, Dick Whale and I used to teach that 3.5 rocket launcher that I just acquired up in Toronto. And we were firing them at Niagara-on-the-Lake, and we're running a course. And we were firing them behind a bunker, and it's all sand, like all military bases seem to be. And if the gun has a misfire, you have 2 men. You have the firer and the loader. And if you have a misfire, the sergeant in charge of each gun is the man who has to do the misfire drill. And what happens in a misfire drill, the guy the firer must put the safety on because it's a magneto which allows the current to go through the line and makes contact with the projectile. So number 2, the loader takes the arm, flips it up to break contact so there's no chance of a current going through. So the young lad had a misfire, so I had to step in. Dick is on gun 2, I'm on gun 1, and these are rockets, and they're a hollow tube, and the blast all goes out the back as it goes off. And I said to the gunner, the firer, I said, safety on? And he said yes. So I reach in, I have my hand at the back of it, turning the round, pulling it out and turning it so I can put it back in to make contact. And just as he does that, he says, I forgot, the safety's off. And number 2 gun fired at the same time. Well, good God, the dust and sand that flew up out of that, I didn't know whether the gun next to me had fired or the one that had my hand in the back had fired. and I wasn't sure I had a hand. And I pulled my hand back quickly, and all the fingers were still there. But I'm telling you, I bet you I jumped a foot off the ground when that thing went off, because it was a scary moment. That table over there we have, it's everything on there. Some the steel helmets, them all, right from the First World War on. There's headdress, different headdress. There's button cleaners. There's shoes, the boots that we wore during the Second World War, shaving gear, the old soap that we used to get issued during the Second World War. All kinds of stuff like this here over there that the kids can pick it up and see it and look at it, and then you can explain it to them. But if that's behind a glass case, it loses a whole lot, you know. And kids get a kick out of it. They come in here, and we've got all kinds of stuff for them that where they can touch and pick it up. We have radio sets here, the old ones, field telephones, and we have a trainer unit for Morse code that used to be used in the schools. We have respirators here, right from Second World War, First World War, and we also have kids' respirators from the beginning of the Second World War that was issued in England in 1939 because they weren't sure when they got bombed are the Germans going to use gas, and they issued them at school. So there's all kinds of things here that fascinate young people. And if you get them fascinated, then they can get interested in history. This is what you have to do. Once they get interested in it and start to look at it in a different sort of way and start reading it, then they'll appreciate what's out there and appreciate their country even more, because they see here all the different stuff that we had and that to make the country the way it is. This is an interesting story of a member of the 21st Battalion in the First World War. At the Battle of Courcelette, this was a company sergeant major, and this is his roll call book that he sent when any men were sent on duty. This is where he kept tabs of where they were. We originally had his 3 medals, his 14-15 star and his 2 war medals, and all of a sudden we found this one with a bullet hole in it. Well, we put it in the case. We did not know how it tied together. And Al, who works here with us as the archivist, was reading a communique book, that's paper that's put out by the 21st Battalion Association. And there's the story of how this book with a ruler in it saved the man's life, because he got shot at that particular book, which is in his left breast pocket, and would have been a shot in the heart. But instead, his life was saved. It was a funny thing that happened out front. We got it on tape, as a matter of fact. When they brought her here, we had the unit formed up out on the street, and there was a whole raft of cars, RCMP, you name it. And she got out of the car and was standing there waiting to get the royal salute. And when the police cars went to leave, the RCMP, one stopped too quick, and the other one ran into the back of the other one. Diana said, "There's too many damn cars anyways." And we picked it up on tape. Yeah. But that's just the way she was. She didn't seem to be impressed with herself for being there. It was just, she was there. She was very easy. Art Twig got to speak to her quite a bit because he was the honorary colonel, and very relaxed atmosphere. Well, Nan is up there on the wall. She was a mascot of the 21st Battalion. She went over to France, and she spent the whole time. She went over 1915, came back in 1919, and she was almost like a good luck charm. In the transport section where she stayed, she used to, when they seen the guys loading the trucks and the vehicles and everything, she knew that they were going to be on the move. So she would hang right around with them. And she had 2 big bay horses that she really liked in the transport section. And she used to stay with them, and that's where she liked to be with. she was really, it bothered her when the two bays got killed by shell fire one night. And she got so that when the shell fire started, she'd run and find a place to hide. And the people in the transport section got so they followed her and hid with her, because it seemed to be she knew whatever it was, whether it was just luck or what, but she never got seriously hurt or anything like that when everybody around was getting killed or wounded. So the troopies in the transport would follow her and figured she was good luck and they'd make it home. And she came back, and she was kept for a while over at RMC, and a couple of people kept her on the farm. In 1919, the Prince of Wales came over to visit the regiment, and he met Nan. He'd met her once in France when he was overseas, and he came to meet her again, and he presented her with the medals for the campaign medals for World War I. And it was all done at the cricket field, right across from the courthouse. I can remember one night, it must have been around 10 o'clock at night, I was out on the street in uniform. I'm trying to think of just what year it was. Police cruiser running around the street, scooping soldiers off the street. And the trouble was, St. Mary, I think it was called St. Mary's. It's right across the church on Johnson and Brock Street. There was a school right across. The school was on fire. And they were looking for soldiers to help them fight the fire. And I got scooped along with a whole bunch of other people, aid to the civil power. And they needed people to help fight the fire. I ended up down in the basement, water coming through all the floors like crazy, and we had to go down the basement and rescue the books on the shelves in the basement of the school while it was on fire. They sent the soldiers down, and that's just what we did. And that's part of the job of the military, is aid to the civil power. And this is what we ended up doing that night. You went home, your clothes all stunk like from the fire, and your feet were wet halfway to the knees, because we're wearing wool battle dress at the time. And this is part of the job of the militia, because we're here, right here. They don't have to go someplace and look for us. They know where we are, and if they need us, this is it. When they had the ice storm here, not that long ago, same thing happened again. Instead of having to run up the base and back and forth, we're right here in the middle of the city. This became headquarters for all the work that went on during the ice storm. This was where everything ran out of here. Any assistance the people needed, whatever went on to work on that, it was all come out of this building. We supplied soldiers to go out and knock on doors and see if the people were okay, what do they need in their houses with the power off for days in the cold winter. And we went out and knocked on doors, and whatever they needed, then we could see about getting it to them. But this is the part of the militia, because we're soldiers, but we're citizen soldiers. That's the big difference. You're citizens of this city, not from some other part of Canada put onto this base to train, but we're Kingstonians, and this is where we're citizen soldiers, because we're not just straight soldiers. And we can be used, and they know where we are, and this building is accessible to them, and it's in the core of the city. So this is important to have a militia unit in a city, because it's there to tie anything together, disaster or whatever, to help. The regular force is now appreciating the militia more than they ever had, because when they were going to Bosnia, the battalions that go to Bosnia, 30% were reserves. Okay, 30% of the soldiers that went over there were reservists called out. And the same, and when it finally got to the one that Bresgan pocket, and Jimmy Calvin was the colonel of the unit, he had 40% reserves. Because there's not that many regular force soldiers. You're rotating, wearing them out. You're wearing them out. And that's what they were doing. Same thing right now in Afghanistan. I don't know what percentage of reserves, but there are reserves in every group that goes over. We got, I don't know how many going over in this one. 7, is it?
I think so.
So you consider all the reserve units, if each one of them put 7 or 8 or 5 into it, what you've done, you know, what you've done to help save the reg force, more so in this army today than during my time, because we were all looked at as second-class soldiers. Okay, the reserves weren't good enough, we're second class. But right now, they're not looking at the reserves that way. You know, it's a sort of a education you're not going to get anywhere. It's probably the only sort of a thing like this you can get involved in where you have a good time, you learn a lot, and get paid for it at the same time. Every Thursday, closest to April the 9th, the unit has a service here to dedicate to members of the 21st Battalion who were lost at Vimy. Parade is held out here on the square with everybody facing the cross of the 21st Battalion. The names of the 73 members of the 21st Battalion killed at Vimy Ridge are read in.